All right, guys, what I'm about to talk about today should have your skin boiling. And for some of you, you think that some of these little studies and reports that come out are meaningless, pointless, pay no attention to it. But by golly, I'm going to give you a laundry list of how these stupid little studies and reports have led to conversations within our global elites on how to make recommendations or force laws and regulations upon other countries as these things unfold. It doesn't matter if the report is completely bogus. Remember, back in 2006, a report came out that said that eating animal agriculture was contributing to 20% of global carbon emissions. That report was actually debunked in 2010, scientifically debunked. And yet today, where are we today? Ireland is killing off 200,000 cows in the name of the environment. These little reports that seem so meaningless mean so much more. Here's another example. A couple years ago, a university came out with a report that said that gas appliances in your house could cause health problems, specifically for children. Once again, a couple years later, that was debunked. It was debunked because they had no evidence to support their conclusion or even their hypothesis. It was just an opinion piece. But what happened with that opinion piece? Where are we today with gas appliances in the United States? Have we not seen our regulatory bodies pretty much try and make them completely obsolete by putting in efficiencies and controls that are nearly impossible to reach? Like I said, these little reports from these universities lead to so many things. It doesn't matter if they're factual or backed by science. All that matters is that they put the report out there and suddenly it gives somebody else in Davos the ability to say we need to get control over this. Now they're saying that the carbon footprint of homegrown food is 5 times higher than conventionally grown food, 5 times higher, which means that you growing your food at home are causing 5 times the carbon footprint of just going to the grocery store and buying it. Now, this was a report that was put out by the University of Michigan. And the University of Michigan wasn't saying they shouldn't grow food at home. What they were simply saying is that there needs to be some carbon controls put in place for homegrown food growers. Heck, if you don't, mix your compost pile correctly, you might have too much nitrous oxide or too much CO2 respiration. Raised bed gardens, way too much CO2 respiration. Which makes this whole thing worse is that it's a carbon footprint complaint. The carbon footprint has been the enemy of society over the last decade or so. Carbon is bad. Guys, we are a carbon ecology. Every single thing you see, all of this is carbon. Carbon breaks down, it respirates. There's no way you could get rid of carbon in a carbon ecology. A war on carbon is a war not just on people, not just on cars, not just on energy, not just on things, but it is on every single species on this planet. A war on carbon is a war on life, all life. Not just human life, every single life. Every single animal you see creates carbon. Not just cows, not just livestock, the ruminants running through the woods, the deer, elk, bison. We are living in a carbon ecology. There is no way you could get rid of carbon except for killing everything off. But even then, the carbon will just decompose and become a part of the ground and the air. But every time somebody comes out with a report that says these guys are causing a larger carbon footprint from these guys over here, within several years, we start seeing regulations. We start seeing taxation. We start seeing a movement to shut down that larger carbon footprint. Regardless of whether or not the study is scientifically backed, regardless of whether or not the study suddenly becomes debunked a few years later, nothing else matters but that particular study. Michigan's a very interesting state for this study to come from, by the way. If you remember back during COVID, the governor of Michigan was the only governor that I am aware of in the United States to have shut down farm supply stores. She basically told her residents, unless you're going to the store to buy food, you have no business going out, and that includes your gardening hobbies. That includes growing your own food. A lot of people wrote this off as this governor just being completely irate. It's kind of like the governor of New York telling upstate New Yorkers, you can't drive in a snowstorm. In fact, you can't even drive before the snowstorm. You can't drive at all because New Yorkers in upstate New York need advice from their governor on how to drive in the snow. or the governor from New Mexico, who took away everybody's concealed carry rights, even though they had been licensed, background checked, with a license to carry, because she wanted to put gun violence under control. How many permitted license holders do you know causing gun violence problems? Most of it's illegal anyway. These governors overreach. And a lot of times when they do it, a lot of people blow it off. A lot of people don't care, like, oh, this is just a crazy person who's never gonna get elected again. But every single time these things happen, it's a test. It's a test to see who's going to respond, who's going to obey. So it makes perfect sense that a state-funded university in the state of Michigan, a state that came out with policies against people growing their own food, would come out with a study that says growing your own food is 5 times worse, creates 5 times the carbon footprint as buying food conventionally. For the average person, when they think about homegrown food versus conventionally grown food, they would think, well, you know, the homegrown food would obviously have less of a carbon footprint, right? Based on everything that we've been told over the years, based on the things that we know. So what it comes down to is really how the story is told. What type of data points were observed and which points were not observed. For example, a raised bed in a garden can grow a larger amount of food per square foot than tilling up some land. They don't want to get into the report, because if we start comparing every little nook and cranny to which one creates more carbon, the report wouldn't be able to say that homegrown food growers are creating 5 times the amount of carbon. And what we want to do is we want to make homegrown food growers the enemy of the environmental cause. So who funded this report? Who funded such a study that would make homegrown food growers an enemy? It was actually partially funded by the European Union's Horizon program. What is the Horizon program? Well, according to the Horizon program, their goal is to create 100 5-minute cities in the near future. And then the ultimate goal is to have 5-minute cities as the encampments for mankind by 2050. If people were living in little peanut apartments, it would be a lot harder for them to grow food. If we allow people to continue to grow their own food, to have food independence, to have food security of their own, they're never going to move into a 5-minute city because they couldn't possibly do that. Guys, this is why I posted that post last week about what's happening in Europe, what's happening with these large farmers. Imagine this, you growing your own food is 5 times the carbon footprint of anything the farmers that are being shut down in Europe are doing. 5 times. You're 5 times worse. You're 5 times the enemy of this new carbon movement, this anti-carbon movement, this anti-life movement. 5 times the enemy. That's you and I. Do you think for a moment that they would ignore this report but grab some gas appliance report that was completely bogus, or take a run on a 20% carbon emissions report from the livestock industry that was also debunked? Do you think for a moment that they wouldn't think, hey, here we have a new carbon enemy that's 5 times greater than these big farmers that we're shutting down all around the world? The end game here is pretty obvious to me, and it should be pretty obvious to you. If you control the food, you control the people. They are going to take control of the food at some point in time. Remember, with the bird flu, do you know how many reports actually came out that suggested that backyard flocks, because they were unregulated, they weren't in a biosecure facility, were the cause of the spread of bird flu? There were several reports that came out about that. And if you look into regulations that have started to file and started to move forward, our government agencies have implemented strategies that would allow them to come in and shut down backyard flocks during the event of a pandemic, a bird flu pandemic. This is the scariest report that I have seen come out in a long time. And it's scary because it impacts every single one of us. And we need to start making some noise about it.